Welcome to the Fear Files channel. Today I'm going to tell you a story that will make you question the boundaries between life and death. This is a story about phantom passengers who appeared in Japanese taxis after one of the greatest tragedies of the 21st century. Get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let's dive into this dark world where reality intertwines with the otherworldly. March 11th, 2011 changed Japan forever. On that day, nature demonstrated its merciless power. A massive earthquake with a magnitude of 9.1 occurred in the Pacific Ocean, triggering a tsunami that crashed onto the country's coast. Waves up to 40 meters high swept entire cities off the face of the earth. Nearly 20,000 people died. Many were never found. The city of Ishinomaki in Miyagi Prefecture was hit particularly hard. It was here, among the ruins and grief, that strange events began to occur. Several months after the disaster, taxi drivers in Ishinomaki began noticing something inexplicable. Imagine an ordinary evening, a rainy, darkened street, almost empty after the tragedy. You're a taxi driver trying to make a living in a city that has barely begun to recover. Suddenly, you see a figure hailing a ride on the roadside. An ordinary passenger, you think, and you stop. The door opens, and a person gets into the back seat. You look in the rearview mirror and see what appears to be an ordinary person. Perhaps a bit wet, a bit pale, but on a rainy night, that's normal. You ask, where to? And that's when the strangeness begins. The passenger names an address in a district that no longer exists. A district that was completely washed away by the tsunami waves. You politely explain that no one is there, that everything is destroyed. But the passenger insists. His voice sounds quiet, almost like a whisper, but there's something persistent in it, something desperate. "Please take me home," he says. You turn around to look at the passenger directly, to explain the situation more clearly, and the back seat is empty. Completely empty. No trace of the person who was just sitting there. The door is locked from the inside. The windows are closed. It's impossible to exit unnoticed, but the passenger is gone. These are exactly the kinds of stories that began spreading among Ishinomaki taxi drivers starting in the summer of 2011. At first, drivers were afraid to talk about it, fearing they'd be considered crazy. But when similar cases began repeating again and again, silence became impossible. Different drivers, different areas, but the stories were remarkably similar. One taxi driver told how he picked up a young woman near the train station. She was dressed in a light summer dress, though it was cold autumn outside. Her hair was wet, as if she had just emerged from water. The woman asked to be taken to a specific district, and when the driver said that district had been destroyed by the tsunami, she quietly replied, "I know. I want to return to where I died." The driver turned around in horror, and she had vanished. Another driver told of a middle-aged man who got into the taxi and remained silent the entire ride, looking out the window. When they approached the coast, the zone of complete destruction, the man suddenly said, "Thank you for bringing me home." The driver looked in the rearview mirror and saw the man was crying. Tears were flowing down his face, but his expression remained absolutely calm, almost lifeless. "Forgive me for not being able to leave earlier," he whispered, and disappeared. These stories attracted the attention of Yuki Aoyama, a student at Tohoku University studying sociology. She decided to conduct her own research, interviewing taxi drivers. What she discovered was documented in her thesis and later became the basis for a book. During the period from March 2011 to March 2015, she recorded at least 7 cases of encounters with phantom passengers, confirmed by driver testimonies. What's interesting about these cases is their consistency. Phantom passengers always appeared in certain places, usually near Ishinomaki Station or close to the areas most affected by the tsunami. They always asked to be taken to places that no longer existed, and they always disappeared without paying for the ride. Drivers described these passengers as absolutely real. They opened the door, sat in the car, their weight was felt on the seat. Some drivers even turned on the meter and started driving before realizing something was wrong. Only when the passenger named a non-existent address or said something strange did the drivers begin to suspect something was amiss. One of the most chilling cases occurred on a cold winter night in December 2011. A driver, let's call him Mr. Takahashi, picked up a young man about 25 years old near a shopping center. The guy looked completely ordinary: jeans, jacket, backpack on his back. He asked to be taken to the coastal Minato district. Mr. Takahashi knew that Minato no longer existed. The district had been completely destroyed by the waves. He politely told this to the passenger. The young man smiled a sad smile and replied, "I know, but my family is still there. I must find them." These words made the driver go cold. He looked more carefully in the rearview mirror. The passenger was looking out the window, and in the light of the street lamps, Mr. Takahashi noticed that the young man's clothes weren't just wet. Water was literally dripping from them, forming a puddle on the car floor. But this wasn't rainwater. It smelled of the sea, seaweed, and something else, something rotting. Mr. Takahashi felt a chill run down his spine. "I'm sorry," he said in a trembling voice, "but I can't take you there. It's dangerous." The young man slowly turned his head and looked at the driver through the mirror. His eyes were empty, like a fish's. "Please," he whispered, "I've been searching for the way home for so long." Mr. Takahashi abruptly stopped the car and turned around. The back seat was empty. Only a puddle of seawater on the floor testified that someone had really been there. After this incident, Mr. Takahashi couldn't work for several weeks. He visited several Buddhist temples, received protective amulets, performed purification rituals. But the memory of those empty eyes and the smell of the sea haunted him for months. Such stories generated many theories. Skeptics claimed that drivers were simply experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. The disaster was so horrific that it wasn't surprising if people started seeing things that weren't there. Psychologists spoke of collective hallucination caused by grief and fear. But the drivers insisted on what they saw. These weren't hallucinations. The passengers were real, tangible. They left traces: water on the seats, smells in the car, even entries in call logs when drivers tried to record the addresses the ghosts named. In Japanese culture, there's a deep tradition of belief in the spirits of the dead. The concept of yurei, ghosts with unfinished business, is rooted in Japanese mythology and folklore. According to beliefs, when a person dies a sudden or violent death, their spirit may remain bound to the place of death or to unfinished business. The tsunami took the lives of thousands of people instantly, without warning, without the possibility to say goodbye to loved ones or complete their affairs. It's not surprising that many Japanese believe the souls of these people couldn't find peace. Buddhist monks in the region reported a significant increase in requests to conduct rituals to calm spirits. Families of the deceased, especially those whose loved ones were never found, performed special ceremonies, hoping to help souls find their way to the afterlife. In some destroyed areas, small altars and shrines were set up where people brought offerings and prayed for the repose of the dead. A priest from one of the temples in Ishinomaki said that after the tsunami, the number of people reporting paranormal experiences increased tenfold. People saw figures of loved ones in their homes, heard voices, felt presences. Some claimed that deceased relatives appeared to them in dreams with requests or warnings. The priest didn't reject these stories. Instead, he said that in times of great grief, the boundary between worlds becomes thinner. But the phantom taxi passengers were a special phenomenon. Unlike typical ghost stories, these spirits interacted with the living in a very specific way. They used taxi services like any ordinary person. They didn't intentionally frighten, didn't haunt, didn't seek revenge. They simply tried to return home. One theory suggested that these spirits were so traumatized by the suddenness of their death that they didn't realize they had died. They continued their ordinary lives, trying to return to everyday tasks. Calling a taxi, riding home. This was part of their former life, a routine they clung to even after death. Researcher Yuki Aoyama in her work offered a different interpretation. She suggested that encounters with phantom passengers were a form of collective trauma processing. Taxi drivers, many of whom had themselves lost friends and family in the tsunami, subconsciously created these encounters as a way to give voice to the dead, to express what couldn't be expressed otherwise. In this context, the ghosts became symbols of the unfinished grief of the entire region. But even Aoyama herself acknowledged that some details of the cases were difficult to explain with psychological theories. Physical traces, water on seats, smells, the matching stories from different drivers who didn't know each other. All this pointed to something more than just hallucinations. Over time, stories about phantom passengers began attracting attention not only in Japan, but around the world. Journalists came to Ishinomaki, trying to find drivers willing to tell their stories. Some drivers refused to speak, fearing ridicule or negative impact on business. Others shared their experiences, hoping it would help people understand the scale of the tragedy and its consequences. One driver who agreed to give an interview on condition of anonymity told a particularly heartbreaking story. He picked up an elderly woman near the hospital. She looked tired and confused. When he asked where to take her, she replied, "Home, please. I'm so tired." She named an address in a district that had been destroyed. The driver, already experienced with phantom passengers, didn't argue. Instead, he began slowly driving toward the destroyed district. Along the way, the old woman quietly spoke, remembering her life. She talked about her husband who had died many years ago, about children who grew up and moved to big cities, about the house by the sea where she had lived her entire life. On the day the wave came, she said, "I was at home. I heard the siren, but I thought I'd have time to gather a few things. Photographs of my husband, my daughter's wedding kimono, the family altar. I wanted to take the memories with me, but the wave came too quickly." Her voice trembled. The water was so cold. I couldn't breathe. I called out to my children, but they were far away. They didn't hear me. The driver felt tears filling his eyes. He continued driving, listening. When they reached the area where her house once stood, now empty and overgrown with grass, the old woman sighed. "Thank you for listening to me," she said quietly. "Thank you for bringing me home. Now I can rest." The driver looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. This driver said that after that ride, he was no longer afraid of phantom passengers. He understood they didn't want to cause harm. They just wanted to be heard, to have someone acknowledge their suffering, their stories. In a culture where respect for the dead is so important, perhaps these spirits were simply seeking recognition that they existed, that their lives had meaning. Interestingly, not all encounters with phantom passengers occurred in taxis. There were reports from bus drivers who saw people boarding buses at stops in destroyed districts, only to find these passengers disappeared before the next stop. There were stories from cyclists who saw figures walking the streets of destroyed districts late at night, only to find that when they approached, no one was there. Ishinomaki residents began adapting to this new aspect of their reality. Some installed small shrines by the roads, leaving offerings for wandering spirits. Others conducted regular prayers and ceremonies, hoping to help restless souls find peace. There was even a volunteer group that regularly visited destroyed districts, performing rituals and leaving flowers and incense. One Buddhist monk who conducted many ceremonies in the region explained the philosophy this way. When such a huge tragedy occurs, the energy of death and suffering permeates the very place. The earth remembers, the air remembers, and the spirits of those who died remain bound to these memories. Only through recognition, prayer, and compassion can this energy be transformed and the spirits be released. Over the years, reports of phantom passengers became less frequent. By 2015 to 2016, encounters had almost ceased. Some interpreted this as a sign that the spirits had finally found peace. Others suggested that as the region recovered and the community's wounds healed, the energetic connection to the tragedy weakened. But the impact of these stories remained. They became part of the collective memory of the tsunami, a reminder of the human cost of the disaster. They also sparked a broader discussion in Japan about how society processes mass trauma, how people cope with grief, and what role spiritual and cultural beliefs play in the healing process. The phenomenon of phantom passengers also attracted the attention of parapsychologists and paranormal researchers worldwide. Many noted that similar stories aren't unique to Japan. After any major catastrophe, earthquakes, floods, military conflicts, reports of ghostly encounters appear. But the Ishinomaki case was special because of its consistency, number of witnesses, and cultural context. Today, years after the tragedy, Ishinomaki continues to rebuild. New buildings have been constructed, new homes, new lives. But the memory remains. Memorials mark the places where the tragedy occurred. Museums preserve the stories of survivors and the deceased. And among taxi drivers who worked in those years after the tsunami, stories about phantom passengers are passed down as a reminder that some wounds don't fully heal, that some voices continue to echo even after their source has vanished. What really happened? Were these encounters genuine paranormal phenomena, or was this a collective psychological reaction to inexpressible grief? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. In a culture where the boundary between the living and the dead has always been more permeable, where ancestors are revered and spirits are considered part of the natural order of things, perhaps these encounters were a form of dialogue between worlds, a way for the living and the dead to find some closure. Regardless of the explanation, these stories serve as a powerful reminder of the human need for connection, for closure, for acknowledgement. The phantom passengers of Ishinomaki weren't monsters from horror movies. They were lost souls searching for the way home. And the taxi drivers who met them became unwitting guides between worlds, helping these souls on their final journey. This story makes us think about the nature of reality, about what happens after death, and about how we cope with loss. It reminds us that in moments of greatest tragedy, the human spirit continues to seek meaning, connection, and hope. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches us compassion, not only for the living, but also for those who have departed, whose stories have not yet been told, whose journeys are not yet complete. Thank you for being with us on the Fear Files channel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next stories. Remember that reality is sometimes scarier than any fiction, and the truth often hides in the shadows between the known and the unknown. See you next time, and may your journeys always bring you home.